we're still in a society that doesn't talk about it as openly. You know, you have Breast Cancer Awareness Month and everyone wears pink, but we don't really get to the heart of it. And I think that that's one of the issues. And I think it's changing. People are being more open about their journey. I've seen a lot of people, even on social media, use that as an avenue to share their experience from diagnosis through treatment and reconstructive surgery. And I think that that helps to start to break down those barriers and help people better understand.
You're listening to The Shift Show, where we use psychological insight to unravel the craziness of life for you, you growth mindset person you. Tune in every other Thursday to hear some wacky psychologists demystify what exactly is happening in that weird organ that lives inside your skull. And for this especially delicious podcast experience, we can thank our friends at Shift Psych, the people who deliver a results-driven and innovative approach in therapy land. Throughout the podcast, we'll throw down some serious psych gems, but these are certainly not a replacement for treatment by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So please seek one out if you need help.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Shift Show. I'm going to be your host for today. My name is Sarah O'Brien. I am one of the clinicians that works out of our Calgary office. You may recognize my voice from a recent Shift Show podcast where I was lucky enough to co-host with our fearless leader, Andrea, around pregnancy and postpartum survival guide. So if you've not yet had a chance to check that out, I encourage you to go now. That's in episode 5, I believe, in the series. So before we get started today, I want to just kind of highlight one of the things that certainly we all are probably familiar with since this remote meetings has become a thing. So we are recording this entire podcast today virtually. So we're going to do our best here in terms of sound quality and consistency, but I will advise that, you know, there may be a little bit of inconsistency from time to time, but trust us, we're going to do what we can to keep it on track. Okay. So today, very excited to have our guest with us. We have a really lovely guest, Michelle Okere. She is the CEO of a wonderful foundation called Compassion House, located in Edmonton. And Michelle has been the CEO of Compassion House since August 2019. So Compassion House essentially is a foundation which supports women who must leave their homes in order to receive cancer care. I'm very excited to have Michelle here with us today to touch on some of those topics, quite complex, that women face all along their cancer journey. So from diagnosis, their treatment, on to recovery. So very happy to have you here with us today, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me today, Sarah. I'm really looking forward to this.
That's great. Okay, we're happy to have you. So I was going to ask you if you would be able to maybe talk a little bit more about Compassion House and kind of what is some of the key things you would like people to know about the services you guys provide there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Compassion House Foundation is an organization that supports women through their cancer journey. We primarily support women from central and northern Alberta who have to leave their homes for cancer care here in Edmonton. So we have accommodation services at Sorrentino's Compassion House. We have 16 suites for women who have to come in for treatment. Primary reason for them staying with us is for radiation treatment because most of them can access chemotherapy and other forms of treatment locally, but you do have to come to Edmonton for the radiation vault. So the average stay is about 5 weeks. And really, while they stay with us, the really beautiful thing about it is the way that they support one another through their cancer journeys. So sharing the experience, talking about treatment, the uncertainty around it, just being able to be really open about cancer and not afraid to talk about it, as well as being able to, walk around the house without a wig or a headscarf on, because everyone else is kind of in that same situation. In addition to that, we have a variety of post-treatment programs and services. So we recognize that once treatment ends, that's not the end of the cancer journey. That's really just the start of that next step. And so we provide things like weekend workshops and retreats. We do an inspiring speaker series. We have a compassion network of past guests of the house who represent us in their communities and do things like facilitating support groups and providing one-on-one support. And then we also just launched last year what we call Compassion Connects, and it is a resource directory as well as contributions from past guests of Sorrentino's Compassion House, as well as professionals who help to fill in the gaps of services that we recognize those in rural communities don't have access to.
Amazing. So very comprehensive, right? Very supportive, and something I think you would probably agree is sorely needed in Alberta for women, and in terms of just that support and connection, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the biggest thing we hear is just how important having that peer support is through the cancer journey, and someone else who understands what it is that you're going through. I think too often, families and friends, they don't necessarily want to talk about it. They don't want to get into it because it is very emotional and it is scary. And I think for a really long time, cancer was seen as a death sentence to a lot of people. And the reality is, with how science has moved and the treatment options that are available, that's not the reality anymore, but it is still a big, scary word. And so people sometimes want to avoid it.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much too for bringing up the emotional impact part of it, because that is going to be one of the kind of main topics that we discuss today. It's just kind of, how we can maybe manage that, some tips for survivors as well. Obviously there's a lot of emotions that may come up, right? And some of them might sound common, some of them might be a little more surprising. So we're going to do what we can to kind of cover all those bases today and offer some like real strategies for managing those. And so Michelle, I wanted to start by asking if we were to just jump into the emotional piece, based on some of the feedback that you've had from the residents at Compassion House. What are maybe some of the less common or kind of surprising emotions that guests have experienced? Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about that, and then I can kind of jump into more of the common ones.
Sure. Yeah, I think you expect people to feel anger and fear and stress and even depression. But one of the things that's really surprising for the women who stay with us is they express feeling, that sense of peace of mind once they've arrived at the house and they realize that they have the support to get through treatment. That first day or so is a little bit uneasy, but once they've kind of been embraced by the rest of the women in the house and feel that sense of support and security there, that peace of mind, it is a surprising one, but it's one that we can continue to hear in the feedback from the women who stay with us.
Yeah, I could see that. That makes a lot of sense. I think, in terms of sort of more of the common ones, right? And these can kind of take effect at various stages of the cancer journey. Sometimes it's diagnosis, sometimes it's well after recovery. Unfortunately, there's really no kind of map sometimes in how these emotions may show up, right? Or how often. But I know worry is definitely one of the more common emotions that a lot of individuals would face. Certainly worry about their health, obviously, the uncertainty that may come up in future health conditions, feeling anxious about doctor's appointments, follow-ups, just kind of even maybe some anxiousness around having to experience more treatment. Certainly that must be something that guests have probably mentioned as well in terms of common experiences for them. Would you say from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you say is spot on regarding that anxiousness around treatment and even through recovery, because it isn't this very linear path. Your treatment plan is laid out, but things might change, and you really don't know where things are going to go. And so we've had guests that initially plan on staying with us for 3 weeks that end up being there for 3 months just because of those changes. And so that uncertainty around when is life going to get back to normal, if you will, and then realizing once you're done treatment that it isn't normal anymore, right? That it's this new normal, and life with cancer that continues on with you. And there's that anxiousness oftentimes before every yearly checkup, right? Like there's that continuing impact that people don't think about. You're not just done treatment and it's over. There's 6 month, 1 year all of these different treatment or all of these different checkpoints with your doctor that causes a lot of concern.
Absolutely. And I think, another concern probably with a lot of cancer survivors can be the financial impact it can leave on them, right? Like that uncertainty around, now that I'm well enough to get back to work, how would that look, right? And the cost of being out of work to recover, cost for accommodations, which thankfully there's a place like Compassion House to ease a bit of that burden. But I could see that as also being kind of a big kind of top of mind worry for a lot of the guests as well. The other emotion I wanted to jump into was just the anger and frustration. So obviously pretty self-explanatory, right? Getting that kind of diagnosis can be devastating. And then kind of the frustration that can ensue through the treatment itself. And I was just wondering if you would be able to speak to some of the feedback you've experienced from guests about what they have found to be maybe the most frustrating part of their journey.
Yeah, I think it's different for everyone. And for the guests, for those who stay with us, there's that extra burden of having to travel and be away from family, right? And especially over the last year where we've been closed off to guests and have to take all these additional steps to keep those women safe because they are immunocompromised. We're not having people come in and out. They're not going home on the weekends to visit family. So it could mean you're away from your family and friends for 5 full weeks, right? And so there's that extra kind of feeling of isolation and loneliness that's associated with it, and just the frustration of being in that situation at all, right? And anger at why me, right? You feel like you do everything right, and there's young people, healthy, active people who get these diagnoses, and it's questioning why, right?
Absolutely. And I that's a great point that you bring up too, Michelle. We'll maybe touch on that a little bit more when we get into sort of some cognitive distortions that can come up, right? Because that definitely touches on one around what we would call like a fallacy of fairness. Because certainly we know there's no fairness in cancer at all. So we can maybe touch on that a little bit as we go. I think, based on my experience discussing individual's cancer journey with them, one of the other ways frustration can kind of appear is this idea that after recovery, they're supposed to just kind of go back to things just as they were, like as if nothing happened, maybe feeling frustrated with themselves for not feeling up to that, or maybe some family members or friends putting a little bit more pressure on that individual, right? Thinking, oh, well, you're technically healthy now, so why don't things just go back right the way they were? I've also heard some good feedback too around individuals that have had well-meaning friends and family ask a little bit invasive questions, maybe some inappropriate questions, some inappropriate expectations. What is your thoughts around that, and what have you heard in terms of that kind of feedback from guests?
Yeah, I think among those who've completed treatment and returned home, like I said, that idea that things are supposed to get back to normal, right? Get back to work, get back to being a parent, a grandparent, whatever it is, and not understanding that that treatment takes its toll. Like energy levels are not going to be back where they were. Women who were very active before, perhaps even doing marathons, not understanding like my body's not going to be able to get right back into that, and feeling frustrated and like your body has let you down. Those have been a lot of the things that people let know about. And so I think that's where that peer support can be so important, like talking to someone who's in the same situation and can say, that's normal. I felt that too, right? There's almost that validation. And yeah, it took me 6 months, a year, 3 years to feel like myself again, or to get back to some of those things, and that's okay.
No, absolutely. One other common emotion I wanted to just touch on, this one, when I had the privilege of talking with some of the guests from Compassion House, just kind of getting some of their feedback as well, was guilt. Guilt is a huge piece. in that journey, sadly, right? So guilt can kind of pop up in some different ways. So there is maybe that guilt of surviving a cancer that maybe somebody else you knew of did not, right? That kind of survivor's guilt. But also kind of speaking to what we just were talking about in that guilt around, like, I should be feeling really happy. I should have all like this boatload of energy. I should be able to just go right back to life without even skipping a beat, right? I'm not working hard enough. Like you mentioned, like the marathoner, right? That like, I should just snap back. And then, guilt around even just some of the feedback they might get from friends and family, right? It's kind of like that secondary emotion to other major emotions that might be going on. So guilt around maybe feeling frustrated with someone with unfair expectations for them, even though, this person might be really close to them, they love them, but they get a little bit angry and irritated, right? Because the expectation isn't really realistic. So then there can be that guilt that kind of sneaks in and go, oh, I shouldn't have, they mean well, that kind of thing. And so we can kind of end up on this like round and round cycle for a while. And that can, I think, make it even a little bit longer for people to kind of bounce back and be at their best. But what are your thoughts about the guilt part of it?
Yeah, that's one that comes up a lot, especially with those who have completed their treatment. But because you're in the house and you're talking to other women who are going through it, as amazing as the peer support is, you're also hearing about their treatments and their journey and how long and hard it has been. And so for those who have maybe an easier journey during their treatment or a less serious diagnosis, an easier treatment plan, that interaction with others can sometimes result in feelings of both relief that, that isn't their situation, but also that guilt that, somehow I had it easier and that's not fair, right? That comes back to that fairness thing. And so survivor's guilt is definitely something that comes up, and especially because you are going to meet people along the way through your treatment or potentially staying at the house or others through your support groups who unfortunately don't win their battle with cancer. And that's hard. Like that is a really difficult thing to experience.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think, one of the things we may want to kind of touch on now is just kind of discussing what can we do, right, with these types of emotions? How can we navigate them? Because it's enough to already try and navigate it. Like these women have navigated their health, right, for months, maybe possibly years. And now it's like the battle's not quite over yet. Now we have to kind of navigate through these ongoing emotions, right, and figure out strategies to kind of cope with them, get through them, and identify them. So I think, and I'll get your thoughts on this as well, but I think a lot of times what can happen with individuals under a lot of stress is, from a psychological point of view, the brain tends to look for solutions and answers. And, like we as humans, we don't really like to feel vulnerable. We're really not good with uncertainty. Sometimes this can cause our brains to fall into some like thinking traps and just like unhelpful patterns of thinking that we just typically call either limiting beliefs or cognitive distortions. So is there a time you can think of, Michelle, that you've got some feedback about some of the guests and what their kind of biggest, I guess, struggle was in kind of mindset after recovery?
Yeah, that one's a tough one for sure. I think, I've had conversations with women who say they had thought that their own behavior or thought patterns in some way resulted in their cancer diagnosis, like they were manifesting it almost. There's a lot of, again, that self blaming that happens there. Also, the altered physical body, especially with breast cancer, can leave them feeling very damaged, worthless, not good enough, right? There's enough pressure as a woman to look a certain way and meet these standards. But imagine your body's not your own anymore. It doesn't look like it used to. And sometimes that reconstructive surgery can take up to 2 years to get in. And so you're living in this body you don't recognize anymore. And it's a daily reminder of your cancer journey, right? And then you have to go under the knife again, right? There's that re-traumatization that happens through that. That being said, so many people do say it is an amazing gift to have that opportunity to have the reconstructive surgery, to feel like yourself again and not have that constant reminder when you look in the mirror. But But, just the reality of our healthcare system, it's not a quick turnaround. And so it can be really damaging.
Absolutely. I think that's an incredible point to mention is just the toll, right? The changes that happen physically, right? Through treatment, it can definitely cause disfigurement or just permanent damage to a person's body, right? And like you said, that scar can be a really powerful reminder of, hey, this is never going to be the same again, right? Where we try to help individuals cope with that kind of, reminder or even a trigger, if you will, is to work on reframing it a little bit. So that's a strategy typically we would use with other thoughts as well. But how that would work is just, when an individual sees that scar, it's a reminder of their strength, their resilience, their ability to overcome, right? That lovely, like, hey, I went through essentially hell and here I am. I'm still here. You can't get rid of me, right? Like, on I go. So it can be kind of seen as a badge as well of, just that strength and courage it takes to get through cancer. So that's kind of one of the ways we try to work with those types of distortions, right? Definitely try to work on helping an individual identify when those thoughts are occurring, right? When are they automatic versus are they consciously having this all the time? Understanding that link between thoughts and emotions, right? Our mood, and then of course, how our mood impacts our behavior. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about that as well. So just kind of jumping into just talking a little bit about what automatic thoughts are. Those are thoughts that typically we don't actually notice we're having, which is unfortunate. You cannot change what you don't have access to, right? So the trick is to kind of build up that awareness slowly. Once we have a sense of, okay, I might be giving myself this narrative of, say, we can use the body image as an example, right? Like, I'm worthless, I'm not strong, I'm weak, I'm not good enough. When we notice those thoughts are occurring, we can start interjecting with them, and we can start that process of reframing and just kind of changing the narrative as well. That can make a huge difference on mood, which of course is going to impact our behavior also. So I wanted to maybe talk a little bit more about some of the kind of emotional and stress management strategies and activities that you've had experience with at Compassion House.
Yeah, during treatment, there's definitely a stress in staying with us because women are coming from out of town, concern about, transportation. How am I going to get to my appointments? I don't know my way around the city. I might not have a vehicle with me. So we try to think about some of the different issues that they might have and have the appropriate pieces in place to address those types of concerns. So we do have a van that we provide shuttle service to and from the cross, as well as out to get groceries, that sort of thing. Through the pandemic, obviously, additional concerns because of being immunocompromised, fear of, if I was to contract COVID, would I be able to continue getting treatment or have to find alternative accommodations, all of those types of things. So we do try to limit exposure by having, groceries delivered to the house, looking at all of the different ways that we can limit their exposure. And then to ensure that they have that support while they're with us, we offer, obviously, in addition to the women supporting one another kind of naturally in the house, we do have more, focused areas of activity. So we will have people come in and do craft nights, or we'll have access to yoga or meditation, or we actually have a gym in the house that's like a full service gym, different things like that, just to create it's an opportunity to create an atmosphere of, community and support in taking part in those activities together, and kind of that, team building. But also, we recognize some of those pieces can be a way that people work through things, right? Whether it's art therapy or exercise. Those are proven methods of working through stress and other concerns. In addition to that, obviously after treatment, we have a variety of post-treatment programs and services. We recognize that the fear of cancer recurrence is a big concern for people. And we've heard in our workshops and from ambassadors and others that new pain or sensation, anything that they feel, immediately brings that fear that the cancer is coming back. And that fear can also be prevalent, like we talked about earlier, before annual screenings. So again, guests and other cancer survivors say that after their cancer diagnosis, they're focused on treatment. And then once the treatment ends, there's this feeling of forever being changed, feeling alone, feeling lost, unsure about what's to come next. And so that's where some of our post-treatment programs and support are so important. So we have our weekend workshops, which you, Sarah, helped to facilitate in February, which was amazing, just really positive feedback from that. We have a Facebook group that allows our past guests to continue to connect with one another. We have support groups in 4 different communities throughout Northern Alberta. And then Compassion Connects, which I mentioned earlier, is a full resource directory, and then other tools and resources that are available to them, things that they can start to implement on their own, which, they have given feedback that has been really appreciated by our past guests, but as well others who haven't stayed with us who have access to that.
Amazing. Again, the social element of recovery, I think cannot be understated. I know at Shift, it's one of the major things we try to encourage people to do, a little differently now since COVID, unfortunately, but you're absolutely right. Like having that strong connection, networking, just that feeling of not being isolated and alone is a huge a boost to well-being and recovery, and minimizing stress levels as well. As unfortunately, since we're in this new COVID world, a lot of people have had, unfortunately, decreased access to a lot of their social support. So again, I think it speaks to just how important organizations like Compassion House are for being able to safely offer that resource for individuals, so that they can kind of have that connection, avoid that isolation, and recover well. I think, and in terms of stress, like you touched on, one of the major stresses is maybe that, anxiousness, that worry about, is this ache or is this pain? Is this it, right? Is this cancer coming back? And, from the psych part of it, it's one of those things that unfortunately can be adaptive, yet also completely problematic, right? In terms of mental and emotional well-being, because, we tend to maybe respond, to certain sensations, obviously with more attention and more focus when it's something that, carries with it the potential for serious harm. So obviously, having undergone something as serious as cancer, going through that painful, invasive treatment, recovering, the idea of oh my goodness, I might have to go through that again can be obviously extremely threatening, and definitely going to play on individual stress levels, right? So it's kind of this, how do we find a way of balancing, okay, let's be vigilant, right? Let's make sure we follow up and do everything our doctors advise us to do, but also that we're not constantly walking around in that state of every little ache or pain I get, that's it, right? I'm going to find out that all the cancer has returned and it's going to be a bad outcome. So there's obviously a nice middle ground in between there. And part of the ways we can mitigate that too is just even some of the strategies you mentioned at Compassion House by just doing some kind of body work and gentle exercise like yoga. It's a huge one. Just kind of allowing people to be in their bodies a little bit more, experiencing what that feels like, and being able to associate that with good feelings, calm feelings, as opposed to maybe painful or scary situations they may have faced through their cancer journey. And I think, again, Michelle, like just all those strategies you covered are really great. It definitely speak to what we recommend for individuals as well. Like certainly with that exercise, with the social supports, with the finding just interests, like things you enjoy doing, right? Like the arts, the crafts, that creative outlet. These are all really excellent things to do to help the brain sort of blow off some of the steam from stress. To get a little bit clinician-y, I might talk a little bit about, how we can identify when it's become problematic, right? And maybe some little interventions about how to manage stress if that's the case. When we know that stress is becoming problematic as opposed to just adaptive, is it becomes something that keeps us in a state of distress, right? So they're kind of the main theme behind when we know our thinking has become unhelpful is it's something that we can recognize as us not having any control over. And certainly in most situations, realistically, we never have full, complete control over our circumstances. However, we often have a lot more than we think we do. And then the idea of taking responsibility or shouldering responsibility for things that are completely beyond our control, that's usually where it gets us into trouble in terms of emotions and ramping up those stress levels. So I was just going to ask you, Michelle, like if you could speak to maybe some of the feedback from guests about maybe what their biggest kind of fear was, right? Or what they felt was their biggest lack of control in their experience.
Yeah, the cancer journey, especially once you've been diagnosed, it doesn't feel like you have much control at all. Everything moves really quickly. And I've talked to people who say, basically you're diagnosed and they send you kind of your options and it's almost like you're given a spa package and you just got to pick and now things are moving, right? And someone else is in control. Like you don't at that point, right? Like you're not the expert. You just follow what are the best practices and advice that your doctor can give you and you get rolling. And so that feeling of being out of control starts right away. And I think like you said, people want to feel in control. So it's like, what can I bring into this that I'm in control of, right? And so I think that's where routine becomes really important for people because they can feel like, maybe I'm not in control of when I go for chemotherapy or radiation treatment or whatever else, but the rest of my time I can find those things that bring me joy. I can start a new art project, or I can get into a regular exercise routine, like something that makes me feel structured and like my life is my own.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. And I think just to kind of maybe give listeners an example of what some of that, helpful versus unhelpful thinking might sound like, I wanted to just kind of run through a little example. So again, like we were discussing, helpful thinking is going to help us empower us and it will create a sense of control, whereas that unhelpful is going to eliminate that sense of control from us. So just as an example, some ways of helpful thinking might be I'm capable of reaching my goals and I know what I can do to help myself feel healthy and content, right? So it's not necessarily, we don't want to completely disregard any real tangible barriers or, negative things going on, but we want to make sure that we are focusing on those things that we can truly do for ourselves, right? Focusing on the fact that, hey, this really bad thing happened, I survived it, and so I have to give myself that credit for that resilience I already have. I have this ability, I have the strength, and if other hard things come, I know I can face them. So that's going to help boost us, right, rather than tear us down. Like another example of maybe like the unhelpful thinking, something that would tear us down, create doubt and distress, would be like, I can never do anything right. I can't do this. I did something wrong and this is why I'm in this situation. So that's really obviously there's no positivity there. That's shouldering a huge amount of responsibility for things that are completely outside of one's control. Because as you mentioned, Michelle, obviously once that diagnosis hits, that is going to be a huge, huge feeling of having no control. Right. So the last thing we want to do is kind of feel those feelings and shoulder and carry things that aren't really ours to carry. I wanted to just speak a little bit kind of where to go from there as well. So, just working on identifying some of those a red flag, so to speak, of maybe unhelpful thinking would be if it's a little bit extreme, right? So I kind of, when I work with clients at Shift, one of the ways I help them identify some potentially problematic patterns of thinking is to kind of gauge that information the same way you would from any other source, because we know this day and age, we are bombarded constantly with all forms of information. Some of it's really good, credible, objective, moderate, helpful. Some of it, we're like, what the heck? How did this person get, where is this coming from? So our brains can unfortunately do the same thing. Depending on what we're feeling and what we're experiencing, we may be more vulnerable to having those kind of extreme thinking in either direction. So just an example of that is if you notice you're having a thought that seems really extreme, particularly skewed towards negative views of yourself, negative views of the situation, you may want to kind of pull back a little bit and ask yourself, being a little bit critical about it, the same way you would if you got like this kind of, I don't know, the chain letter example I use, like somebody emails you saying, well, if you're going to forward this to like 1 million people, there's going to be a comet that comes out of the sky. And, it's like, well, that sounds really bad and super extreme. And I'm not sure how credible that is because there's not really any other middle ground there. So just kind of having that time with yourself, those thoughts, just sitting with them, observing them, breaking them down a little bit, just being critical about it, identifying, maybe I'm in a tough place right now. Maybe I had a difficult day. Maybe I am concerned or anxious about an upcoming appointment. And that's what might be fueling these extreme thoughts and these extreme worries. So I think, again, just some of the activities that Compassion House offers is such a great way to mitigate, those vulnerabilities. So Michelle, can I ask you just again, kind of based on your experiences with the guests at Compassion House, can you kind of provide just some of the misconceptions about the cancer journey for people that may be unfamiliar with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this idea that the cancer journey is a straight and fast path from diagnosis to recovery that patients are expected to experience, right? That this plan has been laid out for you. I'm going to follow this and everything's going to go the way that it's supposed to. Unfortunately, that's rarely the case. And so understanding that it is a marathon, not a sprint. There's also often unexpected twists and turns along the way in response to treatment, change in your initial diagnosis after further testing and surgeries. So just being prepared for that, I think, is really important. I think there's still a misconception out there as well that, some people think cancer is a death sentence. There's this idea that once that cancer word has been put out there, that eventually it's going to, eventually you're going to die from that. And that's really not the case anymore. There's, significant advancements in screening and treatment. The science has really been put behind this. And so it's very different than was 30 or 40 years ago. And so I think that that's really important for people to understand because it not just affects the individual that's been diagnosed, it also affects how people around them treat them, right? There's this fear of even talking about it because it's this big scary thing. And so people talk about, their families being scared to have those conversations with them, to understand the treatment plan, friends not wanting to talk about it, or just kind of going dark altogether. And that's a really hard, coming back to the emotional side of it, it's really hard to feel like you've been abandoned in your darkest hour.
Oh, absolutely. Again, I wonder if it's sometimes this idea people have, this fear, right, of by talking about it, it's going to make it worse, or that terrible feeling, right, to be going through something so intense and not feeling like you can share that with somebody else because you're worried about the impact it may have on them. That is definitely a really tough place to be emotionally and mentally. It can foster those feelings of isolation. And I know that speaking with some of the individuals that have, come out through their recovery, that is definitely one of the biggest things that they said too, right? Was that I don't want to be a downer. I don't want to ruin the conversation talking about my diagnosis or my treatment or my experiences, which is my goodness, right? Like it's such a major piece of that person's life in that moment. So the idea of feeling like, well, I don't want to bring everyone down. Like, my goodness, right? That should not be the biggest concern that person is facing. But you're right. I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of taboo and stigma in general, right, around things that involve, surgery, medical stuff, right? People don't know how to act around it. People don't know what to say even sometimes too, right? Which I think can lead to other kind of complicated conversations or dynamics with even like well-meaning friends and family, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is hard. Like, none of us were taught exactly how to deal with this. Not everyone works in your field. And so what is the appropriate way to talk about people's emotions? But I think the biggest thing is understanding they need to talk about it. This is a significant event in their life, oftentimes taking months, weeks, if not years. And so to have that opportunity to express what you've experienced, to feel understood and validated for the way that you feel is so important. And like you said, we get that feedback from our past guests all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, just kind of speaking to like the potential barriers for social support and having adequate social support, you touched on something else that I think is important to, unpack a little bit more. And that's when people just, that kind of going dark, right? Like the friends and family that sadly, I mean, again, this is the psych part of it, right? But it's like, it's frustrating when individuals that maybe have not been able to kind of sort through their own emotions or thoughts about something that they find uncomfortable, right? Or troubling. Sometimes they think, well, the best thing I can do is just avoid that. And like you said, validation is such a huge piece to feeling heard, feeling cared for, feeling recognized and valued. And so when individuals sort of just back away and go, well, I'll just pretend it's not a thing, it's incredibly minimizing to that person, right? Incredibly invalidating. And that oftentimes can leave that person in their journey kind of internalizing that as like, oh, again, I'm that downer, right? I'm bringing up things nobody wants to hear or talk about. And sadly, I'm like, it's the other person's issues likely that are causing that interference, not the person themselves. Certainly no one chooses to get cancer. No one chooses to go through the treatment, like to have that impact on their bodies, right? And so that idea of almost approaching it like it's this weird sort of like social taboo. It is very odd, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that it's just, we're still in a society that doesn't talk about it as openly. You have Breast Cancer Awareness Month and everyone wears pink, but we don't really get to the heart of it, right? And I think that that's one of the issues. And I think it's changing. People are being more open about their journey. I've seen a lot of people, even on social media, use that as an avenue to share their experience from diagnosis through treatment and reconstructive surgery. And I think that helps to start to break down those barriers and help people better understand. And, I have a lot of empathy for those who are experiencing it as a loved one as well. It's hard, right? Like we've heard from, children whose mom stayed with us while she was undergoing cancer treatment, and how hard it was on them for them, mom being away, right? And maybe 5 hours away or further, and she's not home. And there's also this fear of, it's funny, we had someone share their story actually for our fundraiser last year who was, maybe 11, 12 when her mom had treatment. And she said her mom would talk about the house and how beautiful it was and how supported she was. And she came to visit one day and she was like, this is, it's better than our house and my mom's not going to want to come home. Right. And so just experiencing that through a child's eyes of like, you have everything you need here. You don't even need us. And so you do think about it. Everyone's experiencing it differently. And there's a lot of trauma in the experience of somebody else going through it and being that support person as well. And we do take that seriously and look at how we can support them as well, because at the end of the day, you can't support your loved one if you're not supporting yourself through it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Definitely one of the most important pieces to recovery in really any kind of condition, right? Or any mental health concern is, you can't pour from an empty cup. So you got to keep that cup full so that you can do what you can and provide yourself with what you need and be the best you can for your loved ones, right? Because you make that a good point with that, as well as life doesn't stop. Right? Like treatment starts, recovery starts, life never gets put on pause usually, because especially for individuals with families, right? Like those mothers, their kids are still there, right? Their husbands are still there, their friends are still there in the background, right? Like it just doesn't stop. So doing what they can to kind of help themselves feel at their best, right? I think can go a long way with boosting that well-being. I guess too, some of the, like we were speaking to before, right, that kind of changing, removing that stigma, becoming more open, and transparent about what that person's been through, what their experience has been, I think really goes a long way just for like the community as a whole too, right? I think it can kind of serve two outcomes. So one is to help that individual feel seen, heard, valued, because they are, obviously. And then also just to help other members of the community that may be struggling or have struggled with certain feelings or experiences themselves, but maybe didn't feel safe or comfortable enough to open up to others about what they were going through. So having more and more people kind of step up and go, this has been my experience, this is how I feel, this is what happened to me, is incredibly powerful and courageous, beyond measure, because the service that provides is really invaluable.
Yeah. And that's why we actually started our Inspiring Speakers series. We realized that there were these topics that people weren't talking about openly, and that if we could bring, someone with that professional background, like a psychologist or a physiotherapist or whomever from a sector, and then someone who experienced it personally to share their story, that we could start to open up that conversation around these things. And even if everyone who attended wasn't ready to talk about it, just being able to ask questions through the comment box and get some of those answers in an anonymous way could be really helpful. And so we did our first one on managing anxiety and distress during your cancer journey. And to have a past guest who has been through it say, yeah, I struggled with depression through that, and it was hard, and I didn't know how I was going to get through it. And I sought therapy out, right? Like I go to counseling regularly now, and it's still a part of my experience to kind of destigmatize even that, like reaching out for help, I think is so important. And to give people that opportunity to say, yeah, you know what, I'm feeling something similar to that. Maybe it's time that I reach out for help as well.
Right. No, very true. I wanted to maybe switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about, going back to the social support. We've kind of touched on some major, I think, points in terms of how can we make sure that individuals in their recovery don't feel, unheard or unseen. But just, if we were kind of to talk to friends and family members, right, of these individuals now, in your experience, what do you feel like would be the best way for us to advise friends and family members of cancer survivors how they can support them emotionally going forward?
I think we kind of touched on it, but it really comes down to letting them talk about it, like letting them work through that. To be mad, sad, frustrated, whatever feelings that they're going through, and to validate those feelings. Like this is normal. You have every right to feel this way, and to not expect that just because treatment's done that things are going back to normal, right? Let them move through that at their own pace and support them through that. I think when the pressure comes, that you should be, back where you used to be prior to this. We should be back on family vacations or going to the gym or back at work or whatever it might be, that those pressures that women do start that self-blame and that pressure on themselves. And so to not put that kind of pressure on a cancer survivor and allow them to work through it on their own terms.
Yeah, no, great advice for that. I think too, just kind of speaking to what you said also, I think sometimes like there's like with expectations, friends and family might be a concern thing sometimes too, right? Where it's like, oh, you've been through recovery, you're on the road to wellness again. Why are you still depressed? Is there a problem? Is this something, that we're doing, we need to stop this right away? Is that something, unfortunately, as a psychologist, we do see a lot of just kind of people in the general population of really pathologizing normal emotional experiences, right? Like you said, it's perfectly normal to have these types of emotional responses. We're built biologically to have them. It's important. It's an important piece of our nervous system to have those emotions and those responses. So when somebody is feeling angry or having a bad day or feeling a little bit low in their mood, that's not necessarily, a catastrophe that needs to be fixed immediately. And I think just letting friends and family know that you're like, this is a normal thing. Just be there, just sit with them, right? Don't try and problem solve, because oftentimes if the solution was really that easy and that simple, well, we would have been there already, right? Sometimes we just need to go through those emotions, have that experience, so we can process them and come back, even more stronger, even more relaxed, and kind of better, more resilient in the future.
Yeah, I think that opportunity to really sit in your feelings, and when they are, brushed aside or we ignore what happened, that's when people really start to struggle, right? That this idea that I need to push it to the side and just keep persevering. And that's just not the reality, right? And that's when I think oftentimes we hear from guests, they feel really betrayed. Like they feel like, people want to ignore it. They want to pretend it didn't happen. They don't want to talk about it, but this is part of me now. And I have to, I can't pretend that cancer isn't something I've experienced or that I'm experiencing. And so that opportunity to really sit in those feelings, as uncomfortable as they are for the cancer survivor, but also for their family and friends and those around them, is a really important piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the kind of biggest psychoed pieces I offer with individuals on dealing with emotional regulation concerns is, that idea of like, oh, well, if I ignore that emotion, it's suddenly not there, because we know that's not the case. I like to use the metaphor of, dirt under a rug. It's like, it's just sweeping dust under the rug. That dust doesn't go anywhere. In fact, it usually builds up, and if you leave it there long enough unattended, you might have a big mess under there that you have to deal with later. So better to just acknowledge it, sit with it. Emotions, like you said, that they can be extremely uncomfortable, really distressing, but they're not harmful. They are a normal part of our functioning. And honestly, if we stop having emotions, that's not a good thing. I would be more concerned hearing about somebody not having any type of emotional experience versus having, days where they're feeling really down or sad or angry. That's just part of being alive. Michelle, I wanted to kind of just switch gears a little bit here and ask you just some more questions about Compassion House, and wanted to ask why Compassion House Foundation has chosen to support only women through their cancer journey. Would you be able to speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So our organization was actually founded by 4 women who wanted to support other women through breast cancer. This was kind of their big project. They actually came up with the entire concept for the house, and it's really beautiful. They understood that women are generally more comfortable giving and receiving emotional support and that it's easier for them to relate to one another, especially if they've been through a similar experience, like a diagnosis or treatment plan. And so they recognize this as a gap in the services that were available here in Edmonton, and the fact that we were kind of that major metropolitan area for the North, right? Like we serve central and northern Alberta, but also the Northwest Territories and the Yukon and some parts of BC and Saskatchewan. And so there's so many people that are coming here and they don't have any supports. They might not have family with them. And so they thought it was really important to create a place that could be that sanctuary for them, that they could support one another. Throughout the years, it's shifted a little bit. So when we originally opened, it was just for breast cancer. And then they realized they were turning more women away than they were actually taking in, because we only had 5 suites at the time. And so we did an expansion campaign, and we actually reopened our doors in 2013 with 15 suites at that time, and opened it to women with all types of cancer. And so the thinking still has been that it's important to have people who are experiencing a similar journey, because of that peer support being so important. And we weren't entirely sure, if we were to open it up to both men and women, if it would be as open, right? If a woman who's going through experiencing breast cancer, and a man who has prostate cancer sitting at the, coffee table in the morning together, are they going to and about talking about their treatment plans and the struggles that they're having, their emotions, the stressors, all of those types of things? It's obviously a conversation we've continued to have, because there is a gap in the services for men as well. And that's something that's been highlighted for us. And it might be an opportunity for us a little ways down the road to expand in a separate house that's more focused for men.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I think that does speak to something important, right? Because we want to kind of create, as a society, right, like kind of want to create the environments that are going to foster that connection, like you said, that openness, right, that connectivity. And we may just not be quite there yet, right, in terms of like breaking down that stigma, discussing those really kind of personal medical things with someone of, the opposite sex. Because like you say, you bring up a good description between like breast cancer versus prostate, right? Yeah. Not sure. They want to sit at the breakfast table and maybe discuss that. And also I think, it builds that powerful sense of alignment, right, with all the guests there, that who they're with has had that really similar experience, or at least can relate, even just on a basic level of just having the same anatomy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, certainly, like I said, we do recognize there still remains a gap in those services for men. And while they might support one another a little bit differently, the opportunity is certainly on the table that we're looking at. Can we potentially down the road provide a service to them as well?
And so just touching on that, Michelle, so you've identified that there is definitely a gap in terms of, treatment, in terms of like having a place similar to Compassion House that focuses on men mainly as the guests there. Are there other gaps that you've encountered so far, just like the available emotional support programs in Edmonton and Northern Alberta for cancer survivors?
Yeah, there's a lot. And that was really part of the project we took on last year of Compassion Connects. We recognized, based on feedback from our guests, that there was massive gaps in the services, especially once they returned home. So, while they were here, they had a whole treatment plan. They were surrounded by doctors and nurses and referred to specialists and psychologists and whoever they needed, right? There's a lot more resources here in Edmonton, being a larger city. But once you return home to Grand Cache, for instance, those services aren't available to you. You have to travel a long ways to get access to them, or, if you're in the rural north or even, the Northwest Territories or Yukon, it might be a flight away. And so that's something that has continued to be brought back to us. And there's been some increases in the number of programs and services available, but that peer support has been huge, and we have tried to close that gap through the Compassion Network and the support groups that have been established, but still many communities don't have them. Access to, counseling or something like that is a little bit more accessible now, because People are taking clients via Zoom, which is new, right? You don't have to necessarily travel for that, which I think is one of the positive things that have come from the pandemic. Or even just those checkups or calls with a doctor, that you can do that over Zoom now, and you don't have to travel again, for some women 5, 6, 7 hours to get that. But there's still so many gaps, and there is this drop off that happens between the end of treatment and then that kind of post-treatment care piece, because I think within our health system still, there's this idea that we focus on the physical health component of it, and then, okay, you're done treatment, right? Like, get back to normal. And so it's not that friends and family are the only ones saying this. It's like our system's almost designed in this way as well.
Yeah, that's a huge piece. Those are conversations I've had with individuals as well, as how just sort of a little dehumanizing, it can be to go through that system, because certainly we, our medical professionals, they know their stuff, right? Good at what they do. However, in that kind of, haste to get somebody treated, get them better, get them out, get them home, right? That it can feel a little bit like, or maybe just like an object, like itemized. Now what? I had all this support and all this, reassurance, and even like hopefully a bit of comfort from the medical staff during treatment. And then, once treatment's done, all that goes away. And so, you're left with now what? So I think there's definitely in my research for the presentation, I was really kind of dismayed to see just the lack of supports available for that, for that emotional piece, and just in general, right? Like how to kind of get that message out and who's speaking on it. So again, just kind of reinforcing how important places like Compassion House are that can provide that resource for people.
Yeah, and actually, it is something that Alberta Health Services recognizes. And I was actually just recently invited to sit on the Living Well After Cancer Advisory Council. And so they are bringing together both, physicians, those local cancer clinics, as well as others who are working in this field from, different sectors, together to look at what are those gaps and how can we work together to address them. And so I do appreciate that, and that there's some funding behind it to recognize, we're not serving these individuals as well as we could be, and what can we do to address those gaps. So that makes me definitely optimistic about the future, and hopeful about what things can look like, especially for those in rural communities down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah. Often I think it is the rural communities, right, that can get left behind. And Michelle, I wanted to just ask if, for people that want to know more about Compassion House, what are some of the ways that people would be able to find you and find that information?
They can go online to compassionhouse.org. That's our website. We have all of our information there, and Compassion Connects is available through that as well. So our entire resource directory and a lot of tools and resources there. In addition to that, we are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and it's at YEGCHF. So that's YEG Compassion House Foundation. So we do try to put a lot of resources, information about upcoming events, all of those types of things. Everything that we do for post-treatment programs and services is available to anyone, anywhere. You don't have to even be a resident of Alberta, and you don't have to have stayed at Sorrentino's Compassion House.
Thank you. Well, I think just to kind of summarize some of the main points from today, I think we've touched on a few things that definitely are a huge piece of cancer diagnosis and recovery, and just kind of that sense of what can we do going forward to, maintain well-being. So I think, being open as much as a person's comfortable being right with their emotional experience, with their physical experience, their experience in general with others, not feeling ashamed, not feeling guilty or, uncomfortable about speaking their truth and their experience, right? Can be extremely powerful for healing. Of course, that social piece as well, just having that connectivity with people, having that physical closeness with people, which a little bit tougher these days. But even just having that person that you can sit with, right, and you know that they're there for you regardless. Somebody that you might not even have to have a conversation about it, right? That person that's with you just kind of knows, and they can sit with you and allow you to have your feelings and be in that reality without trying to fix. And I think also just, identifying some issues just in our system in general, right? Those holes of treatment, and going forward, what are some possibilities for maybe filling in those gaps and providing those extra resources to people, as well as identifying, members of the Alberta community that may be more vulnerable to not getting what they need in their recovery journey, as well. And so, Michelle, before we wrap up for today, I wanted to ask, is there anything else that you would like to add to the conversation from today?
No, I think you've done a really good job in summarizing it, and we really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you further about it. Again, like I said, this isn't always something that people want to talk about, but I think it needs to be talked about. And certainly if people want to follow along with us, I've told you where you can find us, but we do host a regular Inspiring Speaker Series every 2 months. That's open to the public, and a variety of resources on our website. So.
Absolutely. Just again, our big thanks for being here with me today, Michelle. I appreciate it so much. And I really appreciate, again, everything that you and Compassion House does for the community. It's a very important service, and it's doing a lot of good. So looking forward to kind of hearing more from what you guys do in the future. And of course, kind of just hanging out here at Shift, doing what we can to break down some more stigma in the meantime. But yes, thank you for what you do for the community. And again, thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Shift Show. Be sure to check out our website, shiftpsych.com, for more great content to help you optimize your life. Follow us on social media at ShiftPsych, and let us know if you have ideas or things you'd really like to hear about on the podcast. If you found this useful or interesting, which you probably did since you're still here, please share and review the show. And make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This lets us know that you like what you hear, so we can bring you more of it. The podcast was brought to you by Shift Psych's Results-Driven Mind Trainers. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Shift Show.